Is this to eat or to look upon?
Good question. Eat.
Oh. Mm.
We are talking Beastmaster 2, Through the Portal of Time. Now this one is directed by Sylvio Tablet and came out in 1991, 9 years after the original Beastmaster. So Marc Singer returns as Dart, the aforementioned Beastmaster, in a sequel which is a very different tone to the original movie. Now, in case you know, there was actually a third movie as well, which we'll be covering at some point. But for now, let's talk about the second movie. And this movie plays a little bit like the Marvel's Thor film, where we have a fantasy character in a kind of fish out of water scenario. So we have Dart, the first half of the movie, in his own world, and we learn that the current bad guy, played by Wings Hauser, this guy called Aaran, is actually Dar's older brother. And he has discovered the means to travel to a different dimension, our Earth, where he and this witch, played by genre favourite Sarah Douglas, intend to steal a nuclear weapon and bring it back to their world, essentially. Now, Dar follows them, along with his animals, into modern-day Los Angeles, and hilarity ensues. So this one, obviously a very different tone, and quite a way after the original Beastmaster. Now, it is a sort of follow-on, but there are some inconsistencies here. Dar looks considerably differently. He has a bleach blonde peroxide dye job. Podo and Kodo, if you remember from the original movie, one of those got killed, but he is back. Vu is no longer a black tiger, he's just a regular old tiger, although there are reasons for that because there was medical issues involved in the tigers in the first movie. Anyway, so that's your basic kind of plot premise here. So a very different movie, obviously very different in tone. It doesn't have the Conan-esque kind of seriousness and gravitas necessarily that the first movie had. And the first movie, I would say, definitely aimed at a much older audience. This one, again, it aims just at a bit of a slightly younger audience here. So what works, first of all? Okay, so I think if you compare the three movies, if you compare Beastmaster 1, 2 and 3, obviously they are decreasing in quality. Now, this compared to the third movie, I would say the scenes that do take place on Dar's own world, if you like, there are some fairly good set design here. And I think it kind of looks, those sequences especially, do look in touch with the original film, albeit the third one certainly doesn't. Although there are some other issues which we'll talk about. So I feel the... you know, there are some scenes here. There's a scene in this kind of cave where Dar is going to get killed at one point, going to get sacrificed. Then we have a scene in a swamp that includes a swamp monster that also, it turns out, is related to Dar. It's actually his aunt. So, you know, it's like the Skywalker family. But they actually do look somewhat kind of, I would say, consistent with the first movie. Obviously, with about the halfway mark, Dar travels to our world, and then it's just more or less kind of slapstick comedy from there on, where obviously Dar, in a fish out of water, kind of, again, very much like the Thor movie, you know, lots of kind of gags, lots of kind of like funny situations, and they are quite funny, I will admit. It is quite fun to see a fantasy character, you know, who's playing it straight, wander around in 1991 Los Angeles and try and deal with the, you know, somewhat exaggerated populace there, but nonetheless, it's quite fun. The movie's actually got quite a lot of familiar faces. Obviously, we've already mentioned, you've got Robert Singer back. We've got Carrie Werhut, who is the kind of the female that befriends of Dar. Obviously, Wings Hauser, Sarah Douglas as our bad guys. You also have small roles from Robert Zadar, who of course was Maniac Cop, and Michael Berryman right at the end. Of course, he was from Hills of Ice, among many others. So a few familiar genre faces here. And they, like I said, there are some legitimately funny moments where we have Marc Singer playing Dara in this police station, I think trying to be interviewed by the police. I think is great. There are a few instances where I just think the comedy, these clashing of worlds, do make for some funny moments. There are plenty which that do not, and there are also some unintentional kind of like laughs here as well. Some of the jokes fall flat, but we'll come on to it. But nonetheless, it is still, I would say, an enjoyable romp. Obviously, very different from the previous movie. It doesn't quite feel as TV as the third movie does. I still think this does have a lot more of the kind of the white. When we see go into, for example, Dar's world, we do actually see a reasonable amount of kind of wide-angle shots and things like that does give it the kind of the bit more of a cinematic feel. Unlike the third movie, which seemed like a kind of a TV episode of Xena Warrior Princess. But what doesn't work? Okay, so the humour is so misplaced when you compare it to the original movie, which was taken dead seriously. And I would personally say the original Beastmaster is one of the standout kind of Conan-style movies that came out in the 80s and stands on its own as a really decent bit of sword and sorcery cinema. And I personally put it right up there with some of the kind of the greats. But this movie really undercuts it, I have to say. Marc Singer, I think, looks in great shape and he does his best, but, you know, I don't know how hard it would have been to make him kind of like, his hair look the same colour at least as the original movie. The characters here are so buffoonish and caricatures, cartoon characters. Despite some of them, you know, doing their best and trying to play it straight, had the movie sort of supported that and maybe had been more dramatic, you could have enjoyed it more as a straight fantasy film. But you have this weird, almost meta humour at times where, you know, Dar drives past the cinema and he sees Beastmaster 2 actually on the kind of the header of the cinema. And there's the infamous thought bubbles from the ferrets and things like this. So it has some like misjudged humour in there. Carrie Wurra, she just overplays this so much. Her character is massively annoying, I have to say. Having rewatched it for this review, you know, I hadn't watched it in a few years, and you never really didn't mind her character. But man, rewatching it now, she is just like on 11 the whole time, and it's kind of annoying. Maybe I'm just getting old and grumpy. One of the things that struck me the most in this rewatch was unfortunately the music here is quite poor, considering the score of the first film again was really, really good. One of the kind of the best fantasy scores I think that are out there, and then you compare it to this one and it's really poor. And there are some, again, they play things for laughs. The final showdown between Dar and Arklon, they play like a comedy music track over it, which is meant to be like the theme tune for this circus. And obviously you can't take it seriously. I think obviously you're not really meant to. It is a kind of campy, silly movie, but they play it straight. The actors and the characters that, you know, had it not been in a modern day Los Angeles, you would expect them to act exactly the same sort of thing. So you almost feel guilty for liking sword and sorcery movies, because this is how people act, you know, in regular sword and sorcery movies, not when they're not in this kind of fish out of water setting. There are some areas here where a little bit tricky. There are some plot threads that are kind of left untethered here, and you know, it's a bit of fun, but in no way near as good as the first movie, obviously. But it's so different, and obviously, I think part of that is the fact that it came out such a long time after the original movie. You know, nearly 10 years. So I think there was some behind-the-scenes drama, as far as I know, as well, between the director and Jim Walensky. So overall, this is still enjoyable, but this is a definition of a guilty pleasure. I don't think you can realistically say this is a good movie, but there are some enjoyable facets to it, and just the absurd fish out of water routine from a character that we've seen who played dead straight in the previous movie. You know, it's such a bizarre experience. It does give it a very unique feel, because when we have movies that are like this, quite often that's the whole movie. There's nothing else preceding it. But this one, we've got a straight movie. And then it's almost like the 21 Jump Street remake, if that makes sense, compared to the TV show. So, I mean, I'm tempted to say 6 out of 10, because I think this is an enjoyable film, although it's not good. But I think I have to say realistically a 5 out of 10, because it just isn't a good movie, but it's still enjoyable, I would say. If you can kind of get over the weird comedy act, then I would say it's still... No, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10, because I enjoyed it. Yes, it's cheesy. No way near as good as the first, but it stands on its own as a very unique entry into the sword and sorcery genre. So 6 out of 10, I'm going to go for it. What did you think of it? Leave me a comment. What did you think of it? Bye for now.